Were you ever utterly, hopelessly lost? Not geographically, though that's a valid concern. No, this is a different kind of lost, a lost in time, a lost in sensation, a lost in the sheer, bewildering chaos of human desire. Imagine a world where the scent of spices mingled with something wilder. A world where silk robes brushed against sun-baked skin and the murmur of foreign tongues was overlaid with the insistent rhythm of a heartbeat. Could you handle it? Let's start with a man named Ibn Battuta. Seriously, this guy. He wasn't just a traveler, he was a walking, talking, meticulously documented human whirlwind. He clocked over 76,000 miles, hopping between Morocco and Malaysia, and he wrote it all down. But here's the kicker, his accounts of women, specifically the availability of women for merchants and visitors, are unsettlingly frank. He's practically advertising a service. Slave girls are cheap in price, he writes, and then, with a casual shrug, all the Chinese sell their sons and daughters, and it is not thought shameful among them. Not shameful? Seriously. He doesn't compel them to travel, doesn't prevent them if they want to. It's like a bustling marketplace, only instead of carpets and pottery, the goods are, well, you get the picture. He's saying, want a wife? No problem, don't want to spend your money on debauchery? Tough luck. It's a remarkably blunt transaction, isn't it? A man's fortune traded for a fleeting connection. Now let's shift gears completely. Meet Alī Akbar Khiṭā'ī. This guy's story is darker. He wasn't just a merchant, he was a chronicler of the unusual, a collector of the grotesque, and frankly, a bit obsessed with the darker corners of Chinese society. He traveled to China in the early 16th century, then bounced around Istanbul and finally penned Khiṭā'ī, the Book of China. This wasn't a travelogue, it was a detailed, almost clinical description of prostitution. And it wasn't just a few brothels tucked away in alleyways. We're talking districts, 500 houses, 1,000 houses crammed together like a fever dream. The details are intense. The children of lords imprisoned and executed, becoming soldiers at a low rank. Their wives and daughters banished to the brothels, their lineage extinguished. It's chilling to read that a crime establishing a relationship with a prostitute could result in a death sentence, followed by eternal servitude. And if that wasn't enough, the women were subjected to a bizarre ritual, a meatless diet followed by temple musicians and dancers, all performing until they collapsed from exhaustion, weeping and lamenting before an idol. The whole thing was designed to appease the gods, to conjure rain. Seriously, rain. It's like a twisted, desperate plea for divine intervention, fueled by human need and a terrifyingly pragmatic approach to weather control. Then there's the bizarre detail about the school for the children, a school for the children of prostitutes, teaching them music, dancing, and games. A bizarre attempt to normalize a life of exploitation to ensure the continuation of the trade. It's a horrifying tableau, isn't it? A system built on exploitation, wrapped in a veneer of bizarre ritual and disturbing practicality. Let's jump across continents and time. Imagine a ship, a creaking wooden behemoth, slicing through the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean. The air is thick with salt and the cries of gulls. On board, a collection of men, merchants, sailors, adventurers, all yearning for something more than the endless horizon. And in Venice, a city built on trade and fueled by desire, they found it. Prostitution wasn't just tolerated, it was institutionalized. The Venetian Council declared it indispensable. A brothel called the Casaletto, owned by two patrician families, became a permanent fixture in the city's landscape. By the 16th century, Venice boasted a staggering 11,654 prostitutes, roughly 10% of the population. Think about that for a moment. A city saturated with the expectation of and the availability of sexual encounters, and the rules. Don't even think about mixing with infidels, Jews, Muslims, Moors, or you'd face a public whipping. It's a bizarre, almost theatrical display of control, a desperate attempt to maintain a semblance of order amidst a sea of desire. But the story doesn't end in Venice. Let's head east to the shores of Brazil in 1492. Christopher Columbus, convinced he'd reached the Indies, steps ashore on an island, San Salvador, and is greeted with open arms by the indigenous Arawak people. They offer food, trinkets, and a seemingly welcoming attitude. But Columbus and his crew weren't interested in diplomacy. They were interested in, well, you can guess. The logs are filled with accounts of trading brass bells and bits of glass for provisions, and then, quickly, for something far more valuable: women. Captured a very beautiful woman, Columbus writes, whom the Lord Admiral gave to me. The details are disturbingly casual. A desire to take my pleasure, followed by a brutal whipping when the woman resisted. It's a stark reminder that the arrival of Europeans wasn't a moment of discovery, it was a moment of conquest, and a conquest fueled by lust. Then, fast forward to 1519. Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer sailing for Spain, sets out on a journey that would circumnavigate the globe. His crew, after 3 years of hardship and isolation, arrives in the Philippines, and what do they find? A frenzy of sexual encounters. The sailors believed they had found an earthly paradise, one chronicler writes. Night after night, men and native women engaged in moonlit orgies. The sailors traded cheap German knives for sexual favors, a transaction that seemed to erase the vast distances and the years of separation. It's a pattern, isn't it? A relentless pursuit of pleasure, fueled by the promise of the exotic and the unknown. The farther away you traveled, the greater the temptation, the greater the willingness to engage in unconventional transactions. Now let's step back for a moment and consider the perspective of the merchants themselves. S.D. Goitin, a meticulous historian, examined thousands of documents from the Geniza, a collection of Jewish trade records from medieval Egypt. And what did he find? Almost nothing about sex. The merchants were preoccupied with contracts, shipping routes, and financial transactions. They were incredibly careful about what they wrote down, terrified of scandal and judgment. It seems that for many of these men, the act of sex was something to be conducted in secret, a private indulgence rather than a subject for public discussion. But even Goitin couldn't ignore the occasional hint of illicit activity. A merchant suspected of visiting public women in Aden, a merchant living with a slave girl. It's a reminder that even the most devout and cautious merchants couldn't entirely suppress their desires. And then there's Ibn al-Hajj, a Muslim jurist from Cairo. He wrote a moralistic work, Al-Madkhal, outlining the proper behavior for merchants traveling abroad. He warned against lingering in markets, playing chess, or telling amusing stories, all activities that could lead to temptation. He emphasized the importance of prayer, piety, and avoiding contact with unbelievers. But he didn't explicitly address the issue of prostitution. Perhaps he was simply uncomfortable discussing such a sensitive topic. So what does all this tell us? That the sexual attractions of the East were a powerful motivator for long-distance trade? Absolutely. It was a lure, a promise of pleasure, a way to alleviate the boredom and loneliness of extended voyages, but it was also a dangerous game. The rewards could be great, but the risks were equally significant. And finally, let's consider the perspective of the sailors themselves. Columbus' crew, Magellan's crew, men who had spent months, even years at sea, cut off from their families and their homes. They were desperate for human contact, for a taste of the familiar, for a distraction from the hardships of their journey. And they found it in the women of the ports they visited. It was a primal urge, a fundamental human need, unleashed by the sheer distance and the overwhelming sense of isolation. But was it worth it? Was the fleeting pleasure worth the potential consequences, the exploitation, the heartbreak, the moral compromises? Perhaps not. But in a world driven by trade and fueled by desire, it was a calculation that many men were willing to make. So I ask you, if you were standing on the deck of a ship, thousands of miles from home, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells of a foreign land, and you saw a woman offering her services, would you hesitate? Would you turn away? Or would you succumb to the allure of the unknown and embark on a journey that could change your life forever?